Welcome back. We began yesterday afternoon talking about the situation in the Middle East, U.S., Iran, the war, with Donald Trump's, as you may remember, tirade or explicit latent tirade that he posted on social media, threatening to wipe out the civilization. You remember that. That's from yesterday. And the deadline was 8 o'clock last night. So everybody was waiting to find out what would happen. Would the U.S. follow through? And then at about 6:30 last night, Donald Trump announced that a ceasefire deal had been reached. Now, it's supposed to last 2 weeks, but in the meantime, we were hearing that it's not exactly taken effect yet, at least from what I can understand. We've been seeing that there's still bombings going on. I had a chance to speak to John Bolton, who was the former national security advisor in Donald Trump's first administration, to ask him what he's making of all this, why he thinks Donald Trump is doing what he did. Remember, he did work with him in his first administration. And, I began by asking him this. Suddenly, there's a ceasefire announced, one that originally the Iranians said they had no knowledge of. Then we were told, yes, they have in fact agreed to a ceasefire. I think there's more unknown in this than there is known. It seems there's an awful lot of ambiguity in here. What's your take?
Well, I think there is ambiguity and indeed flat-out disagreement between Iran and the United States. Trump conditioned acceptance of the ceasefire on basically free and open access to the strait. Iran's response was, we're happy to open the strait, and basically we will coordinate it, which is not the same thing, to say the least. There's a clear disagreement on whether the ceasefire applies to Lebanon. Israel says no. Iran says yes. And there's a clear disagreement on really what the negotiations that may or may not begin this week in Pakistan will encompass and what the parties' positions are. Trump, in his typically used car salesman approach, is saying that everything's going fine. We're going to work with Iran to take out what he calls the nuclear dust, which I think he means enriched uranium. I think there is zero chance the Iranians are going to agree to that. But I think what all this shows is that Trump feared the political ramifications of higher gas prices at the pump in the U.S., and I've worried that for 2 weeks he's going to get out and maybe get out not realizing the price that the U.S. and others will pay if we leave this regime in place. The continuing nuclear threat if the regime remains in power, the continuing terrorist threat, and now the all-too-palpable threat against the global economy of closing the Strait of Hormuz, a threat that's been there for 100 years that people just didn't pay enough attention to, and indeed, despite continued U.S. concern about it, really going back to the revolution of 1979 itself. So we allowed this to happen, and now Trump is purporting to agree to a ceasefire without clearing the strait militarily, which would have been the one thing, I think, that could have convinced Iran that the threat was ultimately hollow.
So to your point, though, if that's what the situation is right now, and this is what the Iranians say, right, of them controlling the flow of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, is this Donald Trump, for all intents and purposes, creating a victory or claiming a victory out of really nothing more than a draw?
Well, I think that's right. Although the damage that was, I speak from the perspective of somebody who wants to see regime change. I don't think there's any lasting peace and security in the Middle East or the world without regime change in Iran. I don't know what Trump's objective is, but what I see is that he's worried about the political impact to himself, and that's driving what he's saying and what he's willing to do. With all that, I think that the damage that has been done in the last 6 weeks inside Iran to instruments of state power like the Revolutionary Guard, like the military-industrial complex, and all of its various aspects, that it will take time and money for Iran to climb out of the hole that it's in. So I don't think you can dismiss that as nothing. You know, the news media are all over Israel and the Gulf Arab countries. They report every missile, every drone that hits targets out there. There aren't any reporters inside Iran from the outside, or they're tightly controlled by the government. The West has no idea how bad the damage is.
So I guess my next question would be with respect to, I saw the long list that the Iranians issued in terms of what they want to see in the ceasefire. There are a lot of things in here you think the U.S. or Donald Trump would object to begin with. You mentioned the toll that would be implemented for ships going through. How do you call this a victory, and how likely is this ceasefire to actually hold then? Because this is a 2-week window.
Well, Trump said that the Iranian 10-point plan was the basis for negotiation, but it calls for the end of sanctions, reparations, acknowledges Iranian control of the Strait with Oman, which will certainly drive the Saudis and the Emiratis, among others, crazy. These are positions I don't see how the U.S. can responsibly accept them. I think for Trump, when he says 2 weeks, with his short attention span, 2 weeks is infinity. And I'm not sure he knows what he's going to do, but he knows he's got 2 weeks to do it.
Well, if you had to speculate here, let's move ahead 2 weeks from now. Nothing changes in this because it doesn't seem the Iranians are prepared to back down. If we can assume that's their position, what happens next?
Well, I think during that 2 weeks, you're going to see the government of Israel and the governments of places like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates saying, you can't leave us subject to effective control by Iran. This is the position the U.S. and the West as a whole has had since the revolution, that it's the position we had when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. We would not put the risk of all of the oil in the Gulf region coming under control of a single power. And now, particularly that power being Iran, it's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable to the Saudis and the Emiratis, who are still under fire this morning. And one of the targets in Saudi Arabia was its pipeline from the oil wells in the eastern province across the peninsula to the Red Sea that allows Saudi to get out a fair amount of oil without having to go through the Strait of Hormuz. But obviously a pipeline doesn't move, and it's an easy target for Iran for that reason. So the Saudis and the others are seeing themselves made subordinate to what they consider, correctly, a lunatic regime in Tehran, and they can't live with that.
You know, one of the issues, again, in this 10-point plan, as you described it, is that the U.S. would have to, A, stop attacking, and B, remove all their troops, their ships, their naval destroyers that are in the area as well. If there's no deal reached in 2 weeks, how likely is it that they would even want to do that?
Well, I don't think the U.S. is going to do that. Even Donald Trump can't retreat that much. But I think he'll just extend the negotiating period. I think he is driven by the fundamental objective, what's good for Donald Trump. And he looks at the markets today. Oil prices are dropping like a rock. Stock prices are going up. He's a happy man today, and he likes being a happy man.
If I could ask you just as a final question, what do you think eventually happens here? How does this play out?
Well, I am afraid that for the reasons I've just said, that we end up with the regime in Iran staying in power and in some finite period of time rebuilding its nuclear program, rebuilding its ballistic missile program, rebuilding its terrorist program, recreating its capacity to cause havoc in the Strait of Hormuz. And at some point, some future administration is going to have to go back and deal with it again. So
all this for nothing is what you're describing.
Well, it gets you a delay. The Israelis call doing this mowing the lawn. And all I can say is with a regime as desperate and as eager to get weapons of mass destruction as the Ayatollahs are in Tehran, I don't think mowing the lawn is good enough. I think the only path to safety is a different regime.
With respect to, they talk about the opposition when you talk about regime change. Is there an opposition in Iran?
I think the opposition is extremely widespread across the country and poorly organized, and that's why I've been saying for the last 6 weeks, really, that before launching this, we should have been in closer contact. We should have found ways to aid the opposition, assist them in organizing, give them resources, communications, money, weapons, whatever they need. This should be the objective, but as I say, I don't still to this day know exactly what Trump's objective really was.
So that's John Bolton. His take, former national security advisor in the Trump administration first time around on the situation as it's playing out in Iran, and again to what he said. Even after that ceasefire deal was announced, and he alluded to this, bombs still dropping in parts of the Middle East. This is not supposed to be happening. So the question is, just how effective is this ceasefire going to be? Will anything change? The latest information that I'd seen suggested that the Iranians are not giving up control of the Strait of Hormuz, not anytime soon. How does this play out? How do you claim victory when what you wanted was, to have the Strait of Hormuz open to all shipping traffic, and that's in fact not the case? So we'll have to wait and see. I believe there's a Donald Trump statement today, or one coming out at some point this afternoon. If we get anything in there, I'll certainly have that for you as well.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.